Hi there, my name's Alan Hepburn, and today we're going to be talking about a technology that was introduced fairly recently to the general aviation scene in the United States, ADS-B. We'll be looking at it from a Canadian perspective. It has the potential to make some quite fundamental changes to air traffic surveillance in this country. Equipment that works south of the border won't necessarily work in Canada, and you may need to buy some additional toys if you want to take full advantage of all the services available in the United States. I'm based at the Pembroke Airport in the Ottawa Valley, where I operate an ADS-B equipped twin Comanche. I've been flying since 1968. There are no prizes for guessing where I got my pilot's license. I've represented COPA on the Canadian Performance-Based Aviation Action Team, a group of stakeholders working on the future of air navigation in Canada, including Transport Canada and NavCanada. This gives me a heads up on what's coming before the aviation community in general is sometimes aware of it. Talking to a flying buddy recently, he asked me what I was doing to keep myself occupied during these COVID times. I told him I was working on a video about ADS-B. "What's ADS-B?" was his response. So it seems that not everybody knows about it already, let alone has had a chance to see it in action. Hopefully this video will help to fill that gap. The technology was developed in the United States, but it has been adopted by several countries. In Canada, the implementation is significantly different from what they have south of the border. And since we frequently fly back and forth, we need to be familiar with how it works in both environments. Here's where the acronym comes from. The system is automatic. It doesn't require any input from the pilot. It is dependent on GPS, that great game changer that hit air navigation in the mid-90s. It's a surveillance system primarily designed to give air traffic control information about the aircraft they are handling. Unlike earlier surveillance systems, the client aircraft broadcast information without waiting to be interrogated by a ground station. Before we get into ADS-B, it will help to take a look at the history of air traffic surveillance. Until ADS-B came along, air traffic control relied on surveillance radar to get information about the aircraft they were handling. Primary radar was introduced for civilian use shortly after World War II. Here's what a primary radar ground station looks like. It puts out pulses of RF energy on 2 to 3 GHz and listens for the very weak reflections. The round-trip time for a target at 30 kilometers is 200 microseconds. In that time, the antenna rotates less than 0.01 of a degree, so it's essentially stationary. The antenna position gives the target's azimuth. The round-trip time gives its distance. Targets could only be seen when the antenna was pointing at them, so most of the time no target information was being received. There's no digital information transfer and no target identification. For identification, they ask you to make a turn. If the maggot on the screen they thought was you turned, it was you. Your altitude was what you told them it was. To solve the problem of target identification, they come up with secondary surveillance radar. The ground station still has primary radar underneath, but there's a second rectangular antenna on top, which sends out interrogation pulses on 1030 MHz, then listens for replies on 1090. Client aircraft are equipped with a transponder. The pilot is assigned a code, which he enters using the 4 knobs on the front panel. Each knob has 8 possible positions, which gives 8 to the 4th or 4096 possible codes. When the transponder hears the mode A interrogation, it sends out a reply which includes the assigned code, 12 bits of information. You can also squawk a dent, which adds a 13th bit to the reply. This highlights the image on the controller's screen. The azimuth and range are obtained just like primary radar, though since the reply is an active signal, it's much stronger than the passive system was. Every transponder that hears the interrogation replies, so if there's more than one target on a given azimuth, replies can get garbled. There's still no altitude information. Mode A didn't last long. I couldn't find a picture of a Mode A unit, but I had one in 1972. To solve the lack of altitude information, they added a second type of interrogation, Mode C. When a transponder hears a Mode C interrogation, it puts its pressure altitude in the 12 bits used for the assigned code in a Mode A reply. The altitude from minus 1200 to about 127,000 feet is in 100-foot increments. Most transponders now display the pressure altitude they're sending. The 13th bit is still used for squawk ident. Azimuth and range are determined as for primary radar. If ground stations are close, responses to interrogation by one station may be heard by another. This can result in confusing returns called fruit. The F and R stand for false returns. So there are limitations to capacity, but Mode A and Mode C is what most general aviation airplanes use in Canada today. There are still two big problems. Everybody replies to every interrogation they hear, whether the ground station needs to know about them or not. And the interrogation response can only take place during the relatively short time that the rotating antenna is pointing at the target. The first problem was addressed by the introduction of Mode S. The S in Mode S stands for selective. Coincident with the move to Mode S, they doubled the size of the identification field to 24 bits. That allows every registered aircraft in the world to be assigned a unique identifier. You can find yours on the Canadian Civil Aircraft Register. A general all-call establishes who's out there. Clients reply with their unique 24-bit IDs, but after that, the ID is included in subsequent interrogations, and only the addressed aircraft will respond. Hence selective interrogation. With a unique ID for every airplane in the world, there's no need to assign a transponder code. Well, actually there is, because the old Mode AC systems aren't going to disappear overnight. So whatever design was used, it'd have to look like a Mode AC transponder to a Mode AC ground station. This turned out to be one of the key requirements for the new system. Mode S has several interrogation types, and most of them are selective. Each interrogation type asks for specific information. Also, the response was expanded to 56 bits, so much more detail could be included. Things like airspeed, angle of bank, etc. So the ground station can anticipate what the airplane will do, reducing the need for position updates. Mode S is still an interrogation response protocol, and the antenna has to be pointing at the target for the duration of the interrogation reply cycle. Introduction of Mode S was gradual, until 144 people died in a mid-air collision over San Diego. That highlighted the need for a collision avoidance system. The result was the development of TCAS, Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, which was soon mandated for commercial aircraft with 10 seats or more. TCAS-2 equipped aircraft not only know where the nearby traffic is, but if both aircraft are TCAS equipped, they negotiate a collision avoidance strategy. ATC doesn't get involved other than being advised that an aircraft has taken emergency evasive action after the fact. The Mode S transponder is just one component of TCAS. Not all Mode S equipped aircraft have TCAS, but they all respond to selective interrogations from either ground stations or other Mode S equipped aircraft. Mode A C aircraft just think they're being interrogated by ground radar and respond with their assigned code or altitude, whether the interrogator is ground-based or airborne. TCAS-equipped aircraft use directional antennas and round-trip timing to determine the target's position, and selective interrogation to establish a data link for conflict resolution. If both aircraft are not TCAS-equipped, it's up to the pilot of the TCAS-equipped airplane to come up with a collision avoidance strategy. Nowadays, the surveillance radars at many busy terminals have Mode S selective interrogation capability. At some busy European terminals, Mode S has been required for some high-performance aircraft for some time, even though they lack the seats to justify TCAS. There was some talk of making Mode S mandatory for smaller aircraft, but nothing came of it here in Canada. The system still has some deficiencies. Capacity was limited because targets still had to be in the path of a rotating beam to be interrogated, and linear accuracy declined with distance from the interrogating antenna. In the age of GPS, everyone knows where they are better than with radar, so why not just send this position to ATC? The ground stations just need to be simple receivers, and they can hear broadcasts from any direction all the time. It also didn't hurt that the cost of the ground station was 1/10 the cost of a secondary surveillance radar station. When they designed the system, there were 3 options for the data link. So what technology was selected? The solution would have to be accepted internationally. It would be no use if none of the foreign operators coming into the States met the US equipment requirement. This favoured the option based on Mode S, since every airliner already had a Mode S transponder. It would just need a software change. While they were tinkering with the software, they doubled the amount of data in a given message to 112 bits, hence the extended squitter designation. The little guys had never adopted Mode S, but now they just have to step in line. This broadcast of position is called ADS-B out, and as we'll see, it's the only ADS-B function that is mandated anywhere. The Mode S ES transponder broadcasts much more than just identification and altitude. There are several message types with different content sent at various update rates, typically twice a second. The possibility of broadcasts interfering with each other is addressed by having clients pick from a number of transmitting opportunities in a pseudo-random fashion. There was still one snag. In the US, 1090 would be too congested in some busy areas. The solution for that was to adopt the runner-up data link technology, a dedicated 978 MHz link, and have some aircraft use this as an alternative. 978 MHz is cheaper. Clients can keep their old Mode AC transponder and simply add a 978 MHz transmitter to meet the ADS-B out requirement. 978 is only allowed below 18,000 feet. Thus, the mandate is crafted to make Mode S appeal to those most likely to fly internationally, while 978 would favour the stay-at-home crowd. They wound up with a dual standard system. 978 is only used in a couple of other areas, China and Japan, not in Canada. So far, the only user of the ADS-B information we've been talking about has been ATC. That's because we've only been talking about ADS-B out functions. But all the hype about ADS-B is about what the pilot receives and sees, the so-called ADS-B in information. Most of the time, a Mode SES transponder isn't broadcasting. It listens for others who are doing so and shows the pilot their locations. This is an example of ADS-B in, and it's the only one that works outside of the US. However, this one example works for ADS-B equipped aircraft anywhere in the world. They will see the position of nearby similarly equipped aircraft, and that's a big plus. If your transponder has dual link capability, you'll also see UAT equipped visitors from south of the border. What you won't see is Mode AC traffic. While more and more ADS-B equipped aircraft are showing up in Canada, it will take an ADS-B mandate for ADS-B equipped aircraft to get a near to complete traffic picture, and that will only be in the mandated airspace. Most users will need some kind of a display unit to see this traffic, but an iPad is typically sufficient. The low-end exception is the avionics Tail Beacon X, which only does ADS-B out, and so can't drive a display. At the high end, there's the L3 Lynx NGT 9000, which has its own display built in. The US mandated ADS-B out in most airspace where transponders were already required, starting on the 1st of January 2020 for VFR and IFR. Let's be clear, the only thing that's mandated is ADS-B out. A few other countries have limited mandates. Australia requires ADS-B for IFR, and Europe now requires it. There are just a few ADS-B ground stations in Canada, and they're placed to provide radar-like traffic separation in the flight levels in areas where secondary surveillance radar ground stations can't be used because there's no ground. None of these ground stations provide the ADS-B in functionality available south of the border. By the time Canada got into the ADS-B game, satellite technology had made great strides. They'd taken the lead in developing space-based ADS-B, which is the obvious answer for sparsely settled areas and oceanic coverage. It's up and running now, and is being evaluated on transatlantic routes. The one big problem with space-based ADS-B is that the receivers are above the aircraft, so the aircraft has to have an antenna on top. And since ground-based secondary surveillance radar, and ADS-B for that matter, isn't about to disappear, they will also need one underneath. This means they need antenna diversity. Most existing Mode SES transponders don't support this, though those used for TCAS do. There's a relatively cheap solution for the antenna diversity problem. Tail Beacon X mounts their antenna where it can be seen from above and below. At the high end, the L3 Lynx NGT 9000 has antenna diversity built in. It's enabled by a relatively inexpensive software unlock key, so this product offers good insurance against the probable upcoming Canadian mandate. They also offer a relatively inexpensive active traffic system that lets you see Mode AC targets until they're mandated out of the sky. Relative is relative to a completely separate traffic system, which used to cost $25,000 US on its own. An active traffic system is a kind of poor man's TCAS. It shows you where Mode AC targets are, but doesn't compute a collision avoidance strategy. Other manufacturers, if they do have a product that supports antenna diversity, require a completely different version of their product. To be effective, a surveillance technology has to be mandated within a given airspace. As soon as you're out of that airspace, it's back to see and be seen, or talk and be heard. Even before space-based ADS-B was operational, NavCanada had put forward a proposal for a Canadian ADS-B mandate. It would have meant that US operators who had just spent a pile of money to meet the US mandate would have had to throw away their new equipment and replace it with units supporting antenna diversity if they wanted to fly in Canadian airspace for example, from Rochester to northern Michigan. The proposal met with a lot of resistance from south of the border, and it's now on hold. However, given the economic advantages, it can't be long before a similar mandate is proposed again. In the US, with the Joe standard system, traffic with a Mode SES transponder wouldn't necessarily know about UAT traffic and vice versa. They solved this problem by having the ground stations retransmit traffic from one frequency to the other. And while they were at it, they also sent the information about Mode C traffic. So all ADS-B clients had a pretty good picture of the traffic situation. The photograph in this slide was taken departing Sun and Fun in 2019, about 6 months before the US mandate came into force. You can see that quite a few users had already become ADS-B equipped. The ADS-B targets are chevron-shaped, whereas the Mode AC targets, which my active traffic system also displays, are diamond-shaped. Of course, I had to zoom in a bit before I got a usable picture on this display. The US ground stations don't transmit the location of all traffic. Rather, they look at all their ADS-B equipped clients and only transmit the positions of traffic within 15 miles and plus or minus 3,500 feet of these known clients. And since clients using the same frequency are assumed to be able to see each other directly, positions of clients on one frequency will only be broadcast if there is a client on the other frequency or a Mode AC only target within 15 miles. Non-clients who are listening in, so-called parasites using, say, a Stratus portable dual band receiver, will only receive spotty traffic coverage. So it may be free, but you get what you pay for. All we are going to see in Canada are ADS-B equipped aircraft. While the number of these is increasing, it will probably take a mandate to make the picture anything like complete. If you're going to go to the expense of getting ADS-B equipped, you should be hoping for a mandate covering as much airspace as possible. Otherwise, when you're outside of the airspace covered by the mandate, you have no idea of the Mode AC targets who are out there unless you have an active traffic system. Now we'll turn to flight information service messages. This includes METARs, TAFs, and other text weather, and also information about temporary flight restrictions and so forth. In the US, these are again broadcast on 978 by ADS-B ground stations and can be displayed by a suitable display, such as an iPad running an app like ForeFlight. Again, this stops at the US border. Even within the US, requests for Canadian weather will draw a blank, and the only next-rad precipitation that will show in Canada is that picked up by US weather radar stations. Sirius XM aviation weather works well in Canada, though weather radar is limited to NavCanada weather radar coverage. It's sufficiently superior to ADS-B in the States that the introduction of ADS-B hasn't put them out of business. There's one other source of free weather information that works anywhere in the world. If you text METAR ABCD to +1 587 806 3827, Weather by Text will send you back the latest METAR for airport ABCD. TAF works the same way. Do check the number, as they seem to change from time to time. This only works, of course, when you can connect to a cell tower. As you might expect, there are some changes to the ICAO surveillance equipment codes. Most ADS-B equipped clients will use /EB2. It's not clear whether these Box 18 changes are necessary, but flightplan.com includes them, so I think the FAA want them. Presumably, if you lose GPS, you may be denied access to the mandated airspace once a mandate is in place. Most causes of loss of GPS are within your control, though I've been hit by interference from a trucker on at least one occasion. If you use weather by text for metals and tasks, turn off the phone once you're finished. Here's another case where ADS-B offers a superior solution to the current technology. This guy was in a Bonanza heading from Oshkosh to Danbury, Connecticut, and he deviated north to avoid some weather. He kept deviating north till he got to Val d'Or 3 hours later. At that point, he lost control of the aircraft and went into the ground. His ELT was destroyed on impact. He wasn't found for days until somebody thought of looking at space-based ADS-B. The Aeron system wasn't even operational at the time of the accident, yet they walked to the wreck in half an hour. Would you rather rely on an ELT that has a poor track record, or have them look for an unexplained end of your space-based ADS-B track when you failed to close your flight plan? We should be pushing Transport Canada to recognize ADS-B as an alternate means of compliance with the ELT mandate, but the powers that be are apparently hard to convince. Interestingly, when the first 737 MAX went down in Ethiopia, Canada knew a lot about it before the US, because space-based ADS-B revealed that it was in a descending spiral in the last seconds of its flight. While there aren't many government-owned ADS-B ground stations in Canada, there are hundreds of privately owned ones across the populated strip in the south of the country. These receivers are built from kits sold to enthusiasts by FlightAware and feed ADS-B out data from ADS-B-equipped aircraft to the flight tracking company. FlightAware used to provide flight tracking only for IFR flights in radar coverage, which in my area stopped at 4,000 feet. With FlightAware ADS-B, I now see my track down to 500 feet above ground, even when I'm up for a local VFR hop. This is the track of our first exploratory outing for this video, to see how far we'd have to go to pick up US ADS-B towers. We were VFR at 5,500 to 6,500 feet. The flight was tracked by FlightAware ADS-B stations in Petawawa, Pembroke, Arnprior, Rockcliffe, Ottawa, Carp, Carleton Place, Smith Falls, Kingston, and even Oswego County, New York. CIFIB stands for Canadian In-Flight Information Broadcasting Association. This is another privately funded operation. It looks like it's a stay-tuned possibility, though it's hard to see it ever servicing lightly populated areas. Only air-to-air ADS-B traffic works in Canada, but we may see a surprising number of these. It looks like anybody who needs a new transponder is buying an ADS-B one, as even ultralights are showing up with the chevron-shaped ADS-B icon. I sure hope they don't get disappointed by an antenna diversity mandate. My twin Comanche, which we'll be using, is equipped with an L3 Lynx NGT 9000 transponder, linked to my iPad using Wi-Fi. It has the optional traffic awareness system installed, so we'll see mode AC targets as diamonds. There will, of course, be no FISB weather until we get within range of one or more of the US ADS-B towers. Then FISB reports will ramp up, though it will take a while for everything available to come in. And of course, there will be no reports for Canadian stations. We'll also see how Sirius XM weather works in Canada. I receive it on a Garmin GDL52 seen at the top right here, and display it on a panel-mounted ERA 660 at the left. The plan for this demonstration flight is to fly south from my home base of Pembroke until we pick up some US ADS-B towers, then demonstrate how ADS-B in works. On the way, we'll hopefully see enough ADS-B targets to show how ADS-B in traffic works in Canada. We'll be using the flightplan.com Go app because the price is right, which is a major consideration for a Scotsman like me. The route of flight will be Pembroke to Gotip and then to Kingston. On the way home, we'll stop at Arnprior for fuel. Here the route is entered as CYTA Gotip CYGK. If our previous exploratory trip is anything to go by, we should have a couple of ADS-B towers before we get to Gotip. For the moment, I've set the traffic display on the iPad to display traffic altitude, which in fact is the pressure altitude being reported by the target's transponder. We'll see that relative altitude is probably more useful for traffic avoidance. We won't be able to set up the FISB options on the iPad until we're in the air. The source of both GPS position and ADS-B information for my iPad is an L3 Lynx NGT 9000 transponder, which also has a built-in traffic and weather display. It communicates with the iPad by Wi-Fi. Since the transponder also has an active traffic system, we may see some Mode AC targets as well. By way of comparison, I'll also demonstrate the Sirius XM aviation weather on the Era 660, since XM weather is about the only solution for in-cockpit weather in Canada. The Era uses a Garmin GDL51 to receive the XM signal from the satellite. For now, I've selected METAR's and base reflectivity radar. Composite reflectivity, which works well in the US, doesn't work with NavCanada's weather radar. So, we're airborne southbound out of Pembroke. No ADS-B towers so far, as you can see by the number at the top right-hand corner of the screen. On the ADS-B tab of the map page, I've enabled most of the available FISB options: PIREPs, NOTAMs, METARs and TAFs. I've also selected both continental and regional weather radar. More on these shortly. I've chosen the unrestricted traffic option in the hope that we'll at least see a few targets other than airliners. Despite the lack of ADS-B towers, there is some traffic out there. There's somebody at our 2 o'clock position about 8 miles away, but he's not showing an identification, nor is he showing an altitude, so he can only be a Mode A target picked up by our active traffic system. Then there's another low flyer, CFIML, about 50 miles away, at our 10 o'clock position. He's showing both an identification and an altitude, so he must be ADS-B equipped. Now we've picked up our first ADS-B tower, but no ADS-B messages of any type have come in yet. India Mike Lima is still out there in about the same position he was a few minutes ago. I checked the civil register and he's a Cessna 310. He's actually too far out to show on the Lynx display, but he shows up on the iPad. Now we're picking up 3 ADS-B towers and the FISB data is rolling in. Looking southeast towards northern New York State, you can see the METAR and TAF locations. They are green and blue respectively. There's also one lonely PIREP. Of course, there's no FISB from north of the border. If we touch the icon for Watertown, KART, we get its METAR. It looks like the TAF hasn't come in yet. Let's look at what we see on XM weather. Each METAR reporting station has a coloured triangle, and you can also see some weather off to the west, northwest of Toronto. The Watertown METAR is the same one we copied on FISB. You can also dial it up directly on one of the Lynx weather screens. I tried to get the Watertown METAR on weather by text, but it says no cell service, so I guess we're too high. Let's take a look at the weather radar now. The only weather this afternoon is west of Toronto. It's showing on ADS-B even though it's in Canada. It must be high enough to show on US radar. This is continental radar imagery, which has a fairly coarse resolution. The blocks are 10 kilometers square. If the weather was closer in to the ground station, we'd get higher resolution from regional radar. The blocks there are 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. In fact, you can just see a few of these smaller blocks south of Buffalo. On XM weather, resolution is 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, as shown here, right across the continent. I should mention one caveat about any data link weather. The information you see is not real time. As you can see from the indicator at the bottom left of the screen, this view was received 3 minutes ago, but it is only sent by XM Weather every 2.5 minutes, and they don't get their data straight from the antenna. The bottom line is that what you see may be several minutes old. Data received via ADS-B may be even more delayed, particularly for radar imagery, where you can be looking at a fast-changing situation. These delays may be significant. So we've seen about all we're going to see from the US ADS-B towers. Now I'm descending to 3,000 feet and heading for Arnprior for some fuel. But we're not finished with ADS-B. The Lynx is showing traffic at our 1 o'clock Golf Echo Mike Zulu, but he's still about 20 miles away and he's 1,500 feet below us. Now we're getting a little closer. He's only 8 miles away and we're at the same altitude, so he's becoming a potential conflict. But that's his pressure altitude. What we'd really like to know is how his pressure altitude compares with our pressure altitude. And that's what we'll see if we switch the iPad to display relative altitude. It turns out he's 144 feet below us. That would still be too close for comfort, but in the meantime he's turned at 90 degrees to our course, so he should no longer be a conflict. Maybe he saw us coming on his ADS-B display. As a matter of interest, I checked this guy's track out on flight aware ADS-B later, and it looks like he was just initiating that turn back towards Carp that you see at the west end of his track. So that's the end of our little trip to explore the capabilities of ADS-B. Let's hope we'll be able to cross the border before too long and make more use of it. On the way back to Pembroke, I decided to check out weather by text at 3,000 feet. I had a good Bell connection and had no problem getting the METAR for Petawawa. So, I hope you now have an idea what ADS-B is all about and can make some informed decisions on equipping your airplane for what's ahead. Despite US opposition, I can't help thinking that an ADS-B mandate in Canada can't be far away. There are major advantages for both NavCanada and their major customer, the airlines. In fact, I'm rather surprised that they didn't go ahead with the proposed mandate above 30,000 feet, since most of the aircraft that fly there are TCAS equipped, so meet the requirement for Mode S with antenna diversity. For those of us who fly in the thicker air below 30,000, there is one glimmer of hope for avoiding the antenna diversity requirement. For smaller aircraft, enough signal may escape around the fuselage for the satellites to see us without an antenna on top of the airplane. It seems that very little consideration has been given to this possibility. Yet that American who went in around Val d'Or probably just had a belly-mounted antenna. The only satellites that perhaps couldn't see us would be those directly overhead. So performance without a top-mounted antenna would be degraded very little, if any. I have an email from Aaron in reply to my question if any consideration had been given to studying this issue. The response was along the lines of, "It's not high on our list of priorities, and aren't most aircraft tcas equipped anyway?" That shows how much they know about the lower life. It's also possible that the concerns of most of the US clients could be met by installing a few 1090 ADS-B ground stations to cover the piece of Canada below 49 degrees north. That would cover the traffic from New York to Michigan and would be fairly inexpensive. As it stands, the antenna diversity requirement is the most expensive issue facing those equipping for a potential ADS-B mandate. Then there's the question about how much Mode AC traffic will be left after the mandate is in place. I bought my active traffic system 5 years ago, so I have had some time to have the advantage of being able to see non-ADS-B equipped traffic. If the mandate, when it comes, forces ADS-B compliance in most of the nation's airspace, my active traffic system will be redundant. If there's a lot of non-ADS-B airspace left, it remains to be seen how many aircraft will choose to keep their old transponders and stay clear of the mandated airspace. These are issues that you have to consider without having full information available. Good luck, blue skies and tailwinds. Just before I go, I'd like to put in a plug for a book I published recently on my flying career, which spans over 50 years. Much of it is about the years after I retired from my day job as an engineer. I flew for a company called Air Journey, who specializes in organizing trips for people who have their own airplanes, but lack the experience to fly them to exotic destinations overseas. Amongst other things, I flew the Atlantic 11 times and the Pacific twice. There aren't many small airplane pilots who've flown into Beijing in a single-engined airplane. It's 255 pages, fully illustrated in color. If this sounds like the kind of book you'd enjoy reading, you can check it out on the publisher's website, or I'll send you a signed copy.